Whew. Okay, guys, I'm just gonna start talking in case you're watching this later. If you're not able to join me for the live stream, at least you will still have some information waiting on you whenever you do join. Hello, Marcus. You are our very first person joining me today. Um, so I kind of wanted to pick up, I want to talk about whatever you guys want to talk about, but I also wanted to pick up with something that someone asked yesterday about is it possible to send energy to the dead, especially using ritual format, like using the invoking rituals, like the pentagram invoking rituals or the hexagram invoking rituals, or even using the middle pillar. They were just asking, is it possible to send energy to someone who is no longer living? And the answer is absolutely, and that this is what a huge chunk of ritual was used for in the past. Everything from, like, now, I used to go every year down to Chinatown on Chinese New Year in February, just because it's kind of an amazing celebration. There's people in the streets wearing dragon costumes, and little kids do things where they'll be like wearing dragon heads running around, and if you put a dollar in the dragon's mouth, you're supposed to have good luck for the year, all that sort of stuff. But one of the things they do is they'll go to the temples and they have these things. I'm not sure if this is if this is the real name for it or not. It's just the name that everyone that I know here in New York calls it. They call it ghost dollars. It's like a fake money. It's the size and shape of real money, but it has other designs on it. Like, it comes in different colors and it has different designs and all that. But people will actually burn ghost dollars for the dead at temples down in Chinatown. Um, so what they're doing is sending money, and that's a good question. Ask that again, and I'll get to that in just a second about retrograde planets. But what they're doing is sending money to the dead by burning ghost dollars. This is what people are doing whenever they leave flowers on graves. The dead don't need those flowers. What you're doing when you leave fresh flowers, like if they're fresh flowers, they're still full of chi. They're still full of life force. They're full of energy. So you're making an offering of this energy to the person who you're leaving the flowers for. So yes, absolutely. And you can do it in a bunch of different ways. Like, if you want to do it, not through flowers or not through ghost dollars or candles or whatever it is. If you're just wanting to use ritual magic to send energy to a person who is gone, you could do it in a bunch of different ways. Like, for example, you can have a photo of them. That's part of the thing also about people keeping photos of deceased loved ones on their altars. What you're doing is, that saying, where your attention goes, your energy flows. When it's there on your altar, every time you look at it, you're feeding attention to it. But you could take that photo, for example, and you could do the middle pillar. Fire up all of those energy centers, pull in the chi of heaven, pull in the chi of earth, and push both at the same time out into the photo of the deceased loved one, with the intention that they get this energy, that you send this energy to them. And the reason you want to send the energy to them, you're basically sending them wishes or prayers. You're sending them something that will serve for their betterment, that will gear them towards that will help them in some way, whatever way that is. You don't have to speculate on whatever it is, whether it's being reborn, like Buddhists do. Well, they make offerings like that. They'll say so that the person will have an auspicious rebirth. What if you're asking them for help? Same thing. You can do the exact same thing. And another example you can do with that, just like people burn like the ghost dollars. You could also do the same thing with, like, write your request on ghost dollars and then burn the ghost dollars. Or, even just on a piece of paper. What it is, usually you're not just asking for stuff, you're asking and giving. It's a give and take situation. There's like a flow there. So what you're doing, like, even if you just take a little piece of paper and write whatever it is that you're asking them to help you with on the piece of paper. Then you do the middle pillar and you push all that energy into the piece of paper. Or you do an invoking, a pentagram invoking or a hexagram invoking, and put all of that into the paper with your request on it, and you burn it. So not only are you sending them, you know, like what's the word, symbolically sending it to them by burning it. Technically you don't have to burn it, but burning is a powerful way on the physical level of signaling to the psyche to let this go, to let it go where it needs to go. So you burn the piece of paper and with the energy on it. It's basically a talisman. You've created a talisman that has a request and this energy on it. You burn it to them, and either it works or you didn't put enough, you know, whatever. That's the way you do it. Let's see, there was something else I was going to bring up. Something, it seems like, let me see what the question that someone asked a while ago, because it seemed like, oh, if a planet is in retrograde, does it make a difference when invoking it? No. As a matter of fact, that's one of the ways to overcome the challenges of retrograde planets. For example, if Mercury is retrograde, then you can double up on your mercurial invocations in order to counteract the Mercury retrograde. Whatever planet is retrograde, you counter. This is what we mean in magic when we say we are aiming to break the chain that binds us to the stars. It means that the stars will no longer dictate what will and will not happen in your life, that you have freed yourself from these bonds that bind almost all sentient beings. And by that I mean it has effects on them and influences on them that they may not even be aware it's having. So magic is the way to break the chains that bind us to the stars. That's what they're talking about with things like that, like counteracting, counterbalancing those things. There was something I was going to tell you guys. Let me see. A question on sigils and seals, the circles, arrows, and all the flourishes. Is there a resource to decode them? I am making a personal seal, and I want to make sure what each line and symbol means. That depends on what you're using. You know, sigils and seals have existed in, you know, there's millions of them. Some of them are ones that individuals made up, created themselves for a specific purpose. And whether you're going to find anything on those will depend entirely upon the person who created them. Did they want the world to know what they mean, or did they not? Did they leave a record of it behind, or did they not? All of that will depend on the person who created it. You can find classic seals and sigils, you know, like the grimoires like the Goetia. There's a bunch of them out there, a bunch of the old ones that have ready-made sigils in them that people have been using for, you know, who knows how long, putting energy into those. And honestly, that's one of the things that makes them so powerful, those traditional ones. You know, keep in mind, somebody somewhere probably created that. That gets me back to what I was wanting to talk about also. The thing about, you know, there's sort of been this kind of, like when I do videos, when I put stuff on YouTube, people always wonder, like, you know, you have sort of two camps in magic. One that believes magic is entirely internal and psychological, that it's nothing but psychology. And those are people who, you know, are usually big fans of Jung's work. And then you have people who go to the other end of the spectrum and believe that all magic is external. And then you've got people in the middle of the spectrum saying some of it's internal, some of it's external. But one of the main things that people ask, the reason I bring this up is because when we're talking about these intelligences, and by intelligences we could be talking about anything from angels and archangels to the old Sumerian pre-flood deities. People want to know, you know, is this just an egregore? And if it's an egregore, did we create it? Or is this an external intelligence that has existed separate from us, whether we believe in it or not? Does it have a reality like we do? Uh, the answer to these questions is all of them. All of it's true. Uh, these things exist on every level of reality. Uh, one of the reasons I always point out John Michael Greer's book, Monsters. If you haven't read that yet, I highly recommend. It sounds kind of crazy, the name of it, Monsters, and he covers everything in this, from like archangels to gods to, the fae or the fairies, whatever you want to call them. And that's another thing too, where people, I don't like that word fairy at all, just because we have these preconceived ideas now what that is, and it could be anything from like Tinkerbell to, uh, all kinds of ideas that people have. Traditionally, they were called the Fae, Fey, and whenever people talk about the Fae, uh, we're talking about, well, let me just say, John Michael Greer goes into Monsters. In Monsters, he goes into how when you're talking about the etheric or the astral level of reality, it is an entire ecosystem unto itself. You have as many different things existing on the astral or the etheric level of reality as you do in the physical world. You've got plants, you've got animals, you've got people. Same way on the etheric level of reality. You've got stuff, everything from, bacteria and things that break down energy that's no longer serving a function or a purpose, all the way up to highly sentient intelligences, sort of like what we call the Fae. The Fae on that level of reality sort of occupied the same place in that hierarchy as humans do in the physical world. The thing is, most people, one of the reasons whenever you're practicing magic and we're talking about doing calisthenics for your aura and hardening the outer boundary of your aura, all of these sort of things, is because everything that exists on that level of reality, whether it's sentient, whether it's a thought form, whether it's an egregore, whatever it uh, is it's still capable of interacting with us, influencing us. The thing is, most people on this level of reality have not developed their faculties of perception to be able to perceive what's going on that level of reality. So, they don't know that they're even being influenced by these things. You could have something like a Fae, and Fae are notorious for, they do not uh, use the same levels of measurement that we do for things like, you know, um, well, just things that they do to us make no sense. We can't make, I'll give you an example. Even things like the Mothman, the thing that they, if you've ever seen that movie, The Mothman Prophecies, with Richard Gere, one of my favorite movies of all time, if not my absolute favorite, just because there's little bits and pieces in there. Yes, their perception is different, their way of reasoning is different, their perception, things like time is different to them. To them, they have lifespans like we do, but their lifespans are so long that by our standards, they may as well be immortal. To them, they're just living a normal lifespan, but to us, it looks like they're living something that's horrendously, just so much longer than our lifespan that we can barely even conceive of it. But in the Mothman prophecies, even the Mothman would technically fall into the category of the Fae, where we're not sure exactly what the hell they are or how many different, like even among humanity, you have different races of people and different nationalities of people and all that sort of thing. It's the same way on with the Fae. You have all different, you've got, you know, just it's an entire field of study and research uh, in and of itself. One of the ways Marcus just asked, is Mothman Seelie or unseelie? That's two of the categories that the Fae fall into. They're courts, like royalty, like aristocracy. You have the Seelie court and the unseelie court. Usually what these phrases mean, like Seelie, tends to mean ones that are benevolent towards us, or at least don't care, one way or the other, about coming in contact with us, or having contact with us. Unseelie, on the other hand, it's a title that tends to refer to ones that aren't necessarily, or are a little, maybe even hostile towards humanity. And if you're dealing with something that's hostile to you that you can't even perceive on the physical level of reality, that's another one of the reasons it's so important to be versed in magic, to be able to put up defenses, and not be manipulated by the energy of things like that. But what was I getting to a while ago? Let me look at your questions again. Give me 1 second. Oh, Shoddy or Shady, forgive me if I'm mangling the name. It's just a name I've never heard before. Sorry if I'm getting it wrong, but you're saying, I'm wondering if you got my question yesterday regarding Mark Stavish's egregores, his talk about disengaging from the connection. I'm glad you brought that up. I did see that question, and I thought that was a really good question, and it was one I wanted to talk about, and I forgot it. If you've read Mark Stavish's book Egregores, and even when you're looking back over history, you see a lot of time people talk about how coming into contact with egregores. Mark Stavish talks a lot about in his book how to disengage from them, how to not be affected by them, how to not be affected by their energy. Where was I going with that? What are we talking about? Oh, the egregores and Mark Stavish. There are certain egregores, like for example, lodges and orders typically have an egregore that watch out for them. Like the Golden Dawn has an egregore that watches over the Golden Dawn. And one of the things you're doing with Golden Dawn rituals is connecting to this egregore. The thing is, what they'll usually teach is the second you've actually established connection to this egregore, immediately you stop drawing on it. You don't want to keep pulling on the energy, because with egregores, the thing that usually leads to the downfall for most people, the question was about basically how in so many of these different stories, using these egregores leads to some sort of unfortunate event, some sort of misfortunate event. Well, the reason for that is, like I was saying, any energy drawn from these things has to be repaid to these things. So if you think that you're just going to draw on it forever and do whatever you want with that energy, eventually it's going to decide to collect. It's going to decide to pull from you. The thing is, it also depends very much on the nature of the egregore, what it represents, what the energy is. And I'll give you an example. One of the things about when we're talking about the HGA, and how that is this entity that the ancient Sumerians referred to as Enlil. And the thing is, Enlil is not a name. Enki is not a name. The names of the angels, whether it be Michael or Raphael, none of those are actually names in the sense that we think of them as being names, like our name. They are like a kind of formula that's describing something. For example, the name Raphael literally means healing of God. That's what it means. So you are drawing on this egregore that represents the healing of God. We may not know what its name actually is. Raphael is just what we refer to it as, because that's the function that it seems to take on, that it seems to play. The same way with Enlil, the word Enlil, it's not a name. It literally, like the N, E-N, means Lord in ancient Sumerian. L-I-L means heaven. Lil means heaven. So Enlil is a title that means Lord of heaven. Enki, En, means Lord. Ki means earth. So you're talking about a title that means Lord of earth. So for example, when I'm talking about Yeah, somebody says it's the same with the Hindu pantheon. The names are the function or title. Exactly. That's the exact same thing we're talking about here. The only difference is, like when you're talking about the Hindu versions, you're talking about Eastern egregores, Hindu egregores, that you're forming these connections to. And when you're talking about like Sumerian or archangels, whatever you want to call them, you're talking about ones that were part of Western culture, Western civilization, that the Western world has fed energy into. But my point is, like for example, this is where something in the Egyptian Book of the Dead comes in. It's really pertinent too. For example, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, they talk about whenever the person dies, they go through the process of having their heart weighed against a feather. The gods weigh their heart on a scale. They put the heart on your heart. They put it on one side of the scale, and they put a feather of Ma'at, this goddess of justice, on the other side of the scale. If your heart is heavier than the feather, then you do not pass further. As a matter of fact, you get devoured. You get recycled, turned back into pure energy. This is the same function. Somebody was asking about the God of the Old Testament, and why is it so like judgmental? Why does it rain wrath down? Because that's what it is. It is a God of judgment. And I think that was one of the reasons that I connected with it, was because when I was in prison, I focused for years and years and years on wanting justice. The thing is, and this is where some of the downfall comes from, if you are invoking a God of justice, which you're doing like when you do the HCA, it's a God of justice, it's a God of judgment, and it's a God of vengeance upon the unjust. So when you are invoking an egregore or an intelligence that has to do with vengeance and justice, you want your plate to be clean. You do not start invoking, like, even, a lot of people will say, well, I want to bring justice to this person who did me wrong. So they'll start invoking a God of justice and vengeance and all these sorts of things, of equilibrating this balance. The thing is, you have to be in the right. You cannot be in the wrong and invoke a deity of justice and vengeance and all of that stuff, and not have any repercussions. So when you're doing the HGA ritual, when you're like a Brahmal and the Mage, the book of Abramelin and the Mage, in there you'll notice like you're working up doing the HGA ritual for 18 months sometimes. And they tell you, like when you first start this ritual, they say, conduct your business in the fairest way, like be just unscrupulously fair with everybody you deal with. Like, don't try to cheat anybody out of money. Don't lie. You're supposed to do everything you can to be quote unquote righteous while you're building up to doing this ritual, because you will be judged. When you're invoking this energy of this egregore of justice. And that's where a lot of people's downfall comes from, is they invoke this energy and then use it for purposes that it shouldn't necessarily be used for, like ruling over other people or judging other people. The minute you start to judge other people, there's going to be some kind of backfiring, because this is a God of judgment. So when you start, this is why Jesus said, judge not lest ye be judged. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone, all of that sort of stuff. He's telling you, when you're invoking what we would call now God, this generic concept that like modern fundamentalists even believe in, you're talking about something that descended from that original entity in ancient Sumeria. So, whenever you're invoking it, I forgot where I was going with that. But anyway, I hope you see what I'm talking about there. That's why you're supposed to do everything you can to purify yourself and make sure your motives are pure, and you're not trying to, exert violence, or I say violence because that's the way they describe it in the Bible. Um, sort of ruling over people in some way. That was the whole thing, that the whole point of the New Testament was telling us, you invoke this energy, but you do not use this energy in that way. Somebody says, I do tarot before any magic like that. That's what Donald Michael Craig in his book Modern Magic always recommends. The thing with tarot, and here's what I point out to people whenever I've done readings in the past, I always tell people, we never ask the deck, what should I do or what shouldn't I do? Because what you're doing is giving away your free will to an inanimate object. Now, we can ask for insight into situations, or we can ask for advice about situations, but we never say, should I do this or shouldn't I do that, because you're giving away your free will. But Donald Michael Craig in his book Modern Magic talks about when you're getting ready to do practical magic, you want to make sure that you're seeing it kind of from all angles, that nothing about it is going to sneak up on you and bite you in the ass later, so to speak. And by that I mean, for example, you do a ritual aimed for what you think is a good cause, a good purpose, something that's beneficial or helpful to someone in some way or helpful to yourself in some way. But there's something you don't see, like perhaps maybe you're supposed to be learning something through the situation that you're going through or whatever it is, and you disrupt that learning process, so you end up having to repeat that that same thing over again in a different form. You end up having to repeat that. That's what he talks about as Donald Michael Craig calls black magic. He says you may be doing magic. It's like that saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You may be doing magic with the best intention in the world, but you're not omnipotent. No one will ever be omnipotent, because you can never know all there is to know. You could be doing magic for something that you think is for the good, and it ends up being detrimental in some way. So Donald Michael Craig talks about using the tarot to basically make sure that you're not going to do something that could blow up in your face in some way. Someone just asked a question. Let me see what it was. So Mike, he asked, if I do 2 middle pillars per day, one with Hebrew and one with Sumerian, will that cause any kind of conflict between the energies? Absolutely none at all. And as a matter of fact, if you have the time to do that, I cannot stress enough how beneficial that would be for you to do. If you do that, it would speed your development up tremendously. The more magic we do, the more we grow. So if you can double up on doing that, like do one in the morning and one at night, either do the Hebrew version in the morning and the Sumerian at night, or the Sumerian in the morning and the Hebrew at night, it will speed up your development like crazy. Plus, the thing is, you will also notice differences between the two. One of them will feel more powerful to you. You'll be able to see one of them more clearly than the other. So it kind of gives you something to compare and contrast. You'll notice after you do each one, like which one you perceive in different ways. So that alone is beneficial, because it helps you become more proficient at perceiving and feeling different kinds of energy. Someone says, where can I find the Sumerian middle pillar? It's nowhere on the internet, to be honest. It was something that I myself put together. And I've only taught it one time. I taught it at a retreat I did in Joshua Tree last year. I'll write it down. You know what? Does anybody know if I wrote it down and posted it a couple of weeks back or not? If I haven't, I'll write that out and post it up. Basically, all you're doing with this, okay, Jen says no. So I'll write that out then. A lot of times I forget these things, but all you're really doing is you're doing, excellent. Okay, so very good. So I'll write that out and post it up. All you're doing, the visualization is exactly the same as when you're doing the Hebrew middle pillar. You've got the different spheres, one above your head, one in your throat, one in your chest, one in your pelvis, one in your feet. They're all the exact same color, but you vibrate the names of these Sumerian deities with them. And the thing is, uh, this is where correspondences come in. You're using. Is it ethical to send healing energy to someone who you have unintentionally harmed without their consent? Let me make sure I'm reading that right one more time. Um, is it ethical to send healing energy to someone who you have unintentionally harmed without their consent? Well, I guess that would depend on what you mean by without their consent. Like, did you ask them and they said, no, I don't want energy from you? Or did you not ask them and you just don't know, whether they would appreciate it or not? Because I would give a different answer in both situations. If you ask somebody, can I send you healing energy? Can I send you, something that's going to help you in some way? This, you know, basically energy for the purposes of blessing you. And they say, I don't want shit from you. Don't send me anything. Then don't do it. Um, but what I do is, if that's not the case, if you haven't asked, what I normally do is, if I were to send energy like that, and I can't remember where I first came across this, somebody recommended this one time. Somebody said when you're sending energy to someone like that, to say if it's not for their best good, if it's not for their higher good, or if they choose not to accept it, then let it go to someone else who can use it, or let it go to something else that can use it. That's what I always say. Like, if this person doesn't want it, let it go. Don't force, don't, you know, have a forceful impact on their life against their will. If they want it, if they're open to it, then they'll accept it. Their energy system will accept it. But if they don't want it, then just mentally kind of program it, say let it go to someone or something else. Let me see. Oops. In 12 steps, it's called living amends, because to make a direct amends causes harm. That's a Jen was just talking about how in Alcoholics Anonymous, like, you have to make amends to people sometimes without direct contact with them or direct interaction with them, because to interact with them might exacerbate the harm in some way. Maybe they don't want to hear from you or whatever it is. In which case you make living amends. So you do the best you can do. If you've harmed somebody in some way, and contacting them would be detrimental to them, then you make amends in the best possible way that you have to do that, which in some cases could be just doing everything you can to be a better person, so that the same thing, you don't replicate the same thing over and over. Okay, guys, we have already been on here for over half an hour already. Let me see. I'm going to see. No Joshua Tree retreat updates yet. I'm still waiting to hear something back from them. That's one of those things that I don't really have any control over. They control all of it, everything. They're the one who create the link and all that. And it's, in California. So, I hope things are opened up and moving by then. But, at the rate things seem to be developing out there, we are going into a scary time in history, and God knows what's going to be happening in October. I hope that I can do it, and I'll keep you posted as it develops. But right now, no. Guys, again, you are coming up with some really great questions, and this is what I love doing. To me, the only kind of conversations that are worthwhile, that are rewarding, that are, soul, that feed your soul, are stuff like what we're doing right now. So this kind of rejuvenates me and pumps me full of energy and gets me excited. So thank you guys for wanting to do this with me. This is going to be one last really, really busy week. I've got one more week of doing promotion, good energy exchange. That's exactly what it is. I've got one more week of doing promotion. I'm going to be doing a lot of podcasts and interviews and stuff this week for um, promoting angels and archangels again, which is really good. So I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to be back on here yet, but I will be back on here the first free day that I have and can do this. And I'll see you guys then. Thank you so much for being with me, and keep doing your practice. Keep writing out your questions. Keep writing out how do we access the Noah Cyrus interview. They don't have it posted yet. I've done a lot of interviews that they don't have up yet, and as soon as they start posting them up, I'll put the links so you guys can find them. Um, and I think that's it. Okay, guys, I hope you have an amazing week. Keep writing your questions down. Keep doing your practice, and any questions that arise while you're doing your practice, write those down, and we will talk about them back here next time. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here, and I'll talk to you in a few days or so.